Welcome back to Late Agenda. Australia loses 2,500 people every year to suicide. That's more than the national road toll and deaths from skin cancer, says the advocacy body Suicide Prevention Australia. Yet we don't talk about suicide and how to prevent it anywhere near as much as we try to prevent road deaths. I'm now going to continue with my panel. Pat McGorry, well, in fact, I'm going to ask Josh first. You are not an expert in this, but you've been a passionate exponent that we need to bring suicide, in a sense, out of the darkness, because you were personally touched by it, weren't you?
I was, like probably most people in Australia. A good friend of mine who I was studying with overseas, who is an American, he very surprisingly took his life, and tragically took his life. Everything seemed to be going well for him in his career, in his personal life, and he committed suicide. And I was left, like all his friends, asking why. And then I started to delve a little bit more deeply into the facts, and as Pat alluded to earlier, they're absolutely alarming in Australia. Suicide is the greatest killer of people under the age of 44. Somebody commits suicide in Australia every 4 hours, and somebody attempts it every 15 minutes. And we've got to do better in this area, and we've been talking about mental health right across the spectrum, but when it takes the form of suicide, it's absolutely tragic, and it affects so many people. And I just think there's a real willingness on the behalf of all Australians to do something about this area, and that's why I think at last, at the political level, mental health is starting to get the traction it deserves. Yeah.
Josh, do you think this sort of radical rethink, I guess, about it, partly includes, in the media the norm has always been to not talk too much about it, not too much detail about the how and why. Has all that actually got to go? I mean, we've always been doing that because we think that it causes copycats, or it causes glorification of suicide. But is there any evidence to actually support that?
Well, look, I think on the issue of mental health, and Tony referred to this earlier, about removing the stigma, removing the taboo, making it no longer a taboo subject, I think that's absolutely critical, so that you can get in, intervene effectively and help people and provide them with access to help at a very early stage, so it doesn't end in suicide. As for publishing the statistics more broadly on suicide, I have some reservations around that. I would leave that to the experts. But certainly on the broader issue, Helen, of mental health, we've got to remove the stigma. We've got to be talking about it. We've got to provide, as the EPIC and the Headspace centres do, a place for people to get treated and to go and to find out more information. All right, that's absolutely critical.
Okay, Dr. Kidman, what do you think about that?
Well, I couldn't agree with Josh more, and I've come across suicide people, families whose relatives, sons, daughters have taken their own lives, and part of my work. One of the things I think that's important is to let people know it's okay to seek help from a professional. One of the great things that we do when we go out to schools, and my colleagues who are all young and enthusiastic go out there and talk to maybe 100 Year 12, Year 11 kids, young people, and it's to let them see it's all right to seek help, and that's okay, and because a lot of people won't dream of doing that. And this is where the concept...
So they get stuck in this mire that's my only choice.
And, going to a hospital to see a shrink, I don't want to do that because I'm going to be designated as mad. So shop fronts, any sort of headspace and so on, coordination, all that's going to help. But it's okay to seek help. It's okay to have depression. It's okay because that's the common cold of mental disorders. And 1 in 4, 1 in 5 people have something that they need professional help for. That's what so that people will get help before it's too late and they decide, I'm going to end it all.
Pat McGorry, what's your feeling about this? I mean, is there enough treatment, and if we're trying to prevent suicide, what are the effective ways that we should be implementing that perhaps we're not?
Well, like Josh, I feel very passionately about this, and I've got much more interested in recent years. And what got me more engaged with it, obviously I see the risk every day as a clinician, but I began to meet with the bereaved families and friends of people who had died from suicide, and I saw how they were sort of locked in a cocoon of silence. They weren't really allowed to talk about it. And so the taboo is like I don't know, it's a huge inhibitor of the whole issue being addressed seriously, whether it's at a policy level or a clinical level. People don't attempt suicide out of the blue. It arises out of significant mental ill health. And when you've got only a bit more than 1/3 of people with mental ill health able to get to treatment, as Tony said, or get to any sort of help, we need to provide a much more open climate about the whole issue of mental health and suicide. We need to provide the stepping stones that Tony was referring to professionals, and that involves empowering the community so that mental health first aid and mental health literacy become part of the fabric of the society. And then I think we'll start to intervene well before people get to the edge of the cliff, which is suicide. And finally, I attended a meeting recently of the Press Council, who consulted a range of experts and others in the community on this issue about whether the guidelines and approach of the media should change. And look, there certainly is some evidence that if the issue is glorified, as you said, Helen, or romanticised, that might have some effect on rates. But what hasn't ever been looked at is the extent to which the silence and the lack of actually the issue being addressed publicly or spoken about, how many deaths does that contribute to? We just don't know. So I think there's a strong move to have those guidelines looked at. Many of the guidelines actually don't demand any restriction of press freedom any more than you would have with any other sort of sensitive subject. So I think we need another look at it in a very rigorous way. And obviously we don't want to increase risks, but that's been one of the mythologies about suicide forever, that if you talk about it, it'll somehow encourage it. Clinicians used to think that. GPs used to think it. And I think we've got to deal with the myths and also be careful about how we go about it too.
All right, gentlemen, unfortunately we have run out of time. I do want to thank my guests, Professor Pat McGorry in Melbourne, Josh Frydenberg in Canberra and Dr Anthony Kidman in Sydney. Thank you so much for joining me, and hopefully we'll talk more about this subject over the coming months. We have some phone numbers for anyone who might want to seek help. Please take those numbers down. They're on the screen now for you, for anyone who needs some help or would like to talk to someone. That's all for this edition of Late Agenda. I'm Helen Dallay. Thanks for watching.